Have you ever found yourself saying these words? How does anyone ever make anything up? Why is everyone so original but me? Am I a farce? Well, do I have the video for you, because today we're going to talk about how to improvise. And to do that, instead of looking at improv comedy or improv acting, we are going to look at jazz. Wait, before you scroll away, the reason we're talking about jazz is not because I want to talk about music, even though I always do want to talk about that. Learning how to play jazz music is the way I learned to improvise anything at all, not just music and notes. So, if I'm going to help you all learn how to improvise the way that I did, I'm going to have to talk about jazz. Alright everyone, step one is to start by listening. Yeah, you thought I was going to say steal. I didn't say steal, even though that's kind of part of it. When I was first learning how to play jazz, the first thing I had to do was learn how to sound like a jazz musician. That means I had to learn a bunch of stuff that other people had played before that was considered jazz and play it myself to see how it felt. The source for TTRPGs is not going to be music, but it's going to be other players at your table, TTRPG streams that you like, different kinds of media that you know about, or anything else that's going to give you material to say or do or make up inside of the game. At this point, you're going to kind of feel like a parrot, because you're not really coming up with anything original yet. You're just saying things that have been said before and seeing if they fit in different contexts. The best way for you to practice this is at the table during your game. Do something that a character that you know would do and make that part of your character. Or, incorporate an NPC that you know from another show and just kind of put it in there, even if it doesn't make sense. I'll put a disclaimer here to say that at this point, it might just feel like you're vomiting up different information that you've heard before. And to be honest, that's kind of what improvising is, but improvisers make it make sense. So, the second step to learning how to improvise is learning the rules. Now, when I say learn the rules, I'm not saying learn all the rules of the game. That's a different problem. This is the part where you're taking all of the information that you know and you're connecting dots between it to figure out how those things fit together culturally, socially, and within the framework of the medium that you're using. Now in music, we have long established traditions for what certain sounds belong to what places and how those different frameworks are related and separate from each other inform how the music of a certain place or a certain culture or a certain people sounds. However, when you're playing a TTRPG, a lot of that work is sort of narrowed down for you. For example, if you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, it's often inferred that you're in something akin to a medieval type setting where magic exists. In Call of Cthulhu, it's much more specific, that being 1920s New England, basically, and that's it. You may be thinking at this point that obviously many people have broken those sorts of associations and successfully played D&D in modern times, or played Call of Cthulhu in times far before that or later. And yeah, you're right, but that's not where you're at yet. Now, of course, we're not just talking about the setting that we're playing in. It's a little bigger than that. We're talking about gauging how relevant any specific kind of material that you've heard or said before would be relevant to the setting or context that you're in. This includes the rules, by the way, the rules of whatever game you're playing. An easy, concrete example to think about with this is TTRPGs that are based off fandoms. If you're playing the TTRPG Avatar Legends, for example, based off the Avatar The Last Airbender fandom, making a character entirely built around firearms doesn't make any sense. Now, you could make that make sense by saying that people who worked under Asami discovered firearms, and therefore you're someone who works for Asami's company and now have firearms. But the key to improvising at this level is understanding how specifically that would be a divergence from the original lore. Another great example here would be Warforged in Dungeons & Dragons, which they had to kind of make their own setting in the form of Everon to justify the existence of. In past editions, you could not just say,
I am a human robot person,
and get away with it, so to speak. However, I will give the disclaimer that if you are at this point of understanding, it will be very hard for you to avoid things like stereotypes. Part of the process of learning about any new social space is learning what has been common, uncommon, and what has hurt people or not, and how. It's very easy to start doing something offensive and end up realizing that it's offensive after the fact, just because it's a trope in whatever system or context you're using it in. So if you start to stumble upon something that you think could be offensive to someone at your table, or like sensitive or demeaning to a marginalized person because like we're about liberation here, then it's probably best to steer clear and avoid it, even if it is part of the source material. I guarantee you there is already another creator out there who has done what you're trying to do in a way that's not insensitive. That being said, don't be afraid to be experimental. As long as you have good people around you who are going to call you out if you do something wrong, and you approach every situation of that with grace and gratitude, people are going to see that you're trying your best first. And that, most of the time, is enough. All right, after you've collected all of those things and you've properly contextualized them, you're already going to be pretty good. It's important to note that doing these things in order is probably something you're going to do a few times for a few different kinds of media that you use. For something to work its way into your repertoire, so to speak, or for you to be able to say it offhand, you have to do both of those things for each example that you know. But regardless, at this point, the third thing you're going to want to do is extrapolate, interpolate, and experiment. This is the part where we use those rules we just learned and we bend them or we break them in ways that make them detractive from the norm. A good D&D example for this would be a bard who cooks instead of plays music. Or maybe playing a Star Wars TTRPG in the time after the Empire instead of during the Clone Wars. It's very important to index on the specific change that you make because that change has a butterfly effect. Using the example of the bard who's a chef, you would now have to figure out a way for your character to force other characters to eat their food to impart effects of certain spells that the bard might cast. You'd also have to figure out logistics for the ingredients, whether or not those things are magically created, and a whole host of other things just because you changed a bard from a musician to a cook. Try this once with something you're familiar with, and I guarantee you'll start to see what I mean. Even the smallest change that goes against one rule can create a whole host of other things that have to follow the rules a different way. All right, now that we've gotten through that, let me give you some caveats about how this system's supposed to work. If you think this means you're going to have to do a bunch of practice and research and get to know all these different films and media, etc., you're wrong. This should be entirely driven by taste and the time commitment that you want. So if you only want to play a certain kind of character, there's no reason you need to study every single kind of character out there to decide on that one character and what they should be like. Also, don't be afraid to discover this stuff at the table while you're playing the game. I guarantee you, if you keep this stuff in mind while you're playing, it's going to start to make more sense and sit with you a different way than it is right after watching this video. Also, this isn't something you're going to have to do once and never have to do again. It's something that you'll learn at every single table you go to, and it'll be a process that you might not even notice it happens, but it will. One of the coolest things about playing TTRPGs is that it helps you build skills like this organically, all while you're having fun. But anyways, that's just a theory, and you can play however you want.